Here. Hello, everyone. Thank you for everyone who joined us today. And we have Dr. Bilal, partner of Shorooq Partners, to join us. And he has a fascinating background, quite unique for a venture capital, I would say. Starting as a PhD in political economy from Oxford, moving to found his own startup, AI startup, and successfully exited it. Now the partner of one of the fastest growing VC fund in the MENA regions. And I will like you to do a quick intro of yourself and say hi to our community.
Yeah, it's a bit intimidating being in front of you all who are probably building the future, not just of this country, but many parts of the globe. You may not know it now, but you very much are. So it's a privilege and an honor for me to be here. So I'm a completely accidental VC. Started my career in US foreign policy as a researcher and a chief of staff, and then transitioned into academia, did my graduate work in the US and the UK, and then was a professor at the Wharton School of Business, where I taught political economy and led the Middle East program. And for a long time thought that was me. I loved teaching, loved research, but unfortunately got a bit jaded of being around academics. This is probably not the right place to say that, but thought, where could I go next, where I could still do research, but in a faster paced environment. Thank you. And went into consulting, and a specific type of consulting called global macro advisory, essentially advising buy-side investors and governments on geopolitical risk. And that's where I got the inspiration for my company, which I founded in 2017, which was business intelligence and insights should not just be the domain of CEOs and narrow, powerful corridors in a select few cities. It should be something that should be available to all kinds of decision makers. So a colleague and I broke away and we built a platform where businesses could connect with subject matter experts around the world. And we called it Inquire AI. We used to call it natural language processing back in the day. Now I guess this is what they call it. And we scaled the business from the US to Asia and then sold half the company to a Japanese conglomerate in 2023. And then the choice came of what next. And having worked on the Middle East my entire career, I really wanted to take a bet on this region. At some point in the late 2010s, we went from hearing just about Kareem and Souq.com to hearing about 5 companies and 10 companies and 20. And so clearly something was going on here, and joined the ecosystem in 2023 with Shorooq. And, the last 2 years have been gangbusters for us. We've gone from around $500 million in AUM to nearly $1 billion in AUM. We are investing across the technology stack, mainly in early stage. And many of you may have seen the news that 2 weeks ago, we launched our first purely AI global strategy with Presight G42. And so we will be the first early stage fund out of the region investing in AI companies around the world. So any of you here or any of your colleagues and friends and networks that are building AI companies and are looking for partners, we'd be very privileged to speak to them. So, I'll hand it back in a second, but the goal of today was really to take that red thread from my background, which is really around global affairs and technology, and talk to you all today a bit about those themes, both historically and today. So I know there's a few questions and we can have a discussion, but would also love to hear from you all and take the discussion forward. So thank you.
Yeah, definitely look forward to the chat. And the news of the AI fund is definitely big in the region. Everyone's quite excited about this. And we will start the conversation with the national AI strategies, because this region is quite renowned of all the sovereign AI initiatives. And how are all the national AI strategies from the UAE and Korea? I know Shorooq has quite some ties with the Korean government, to the US, China, and Europe, reshaping access to compute, data, talent, and what do you see the constraints and opportunities around those national AI initiatives?
Yeah. So I think In answering that question, it's important to take a step back and even ask, what is the relationship between machines and geopolitics, or machines and international affairs? And there's a fabulous book by Thomas Rid on the rise of the machines, which I encourage everyone here to read. And he draws a fabulous arc of history, really over the last sort of 75 years, that the emergence and focus of smart machines is inherently a political exercise. That governments have historically sought to produce and invest in smart machines as a means of surveillance, as a means of information control, as a means of security. And so they are inherently political projects. So how have machines been able to control the complexity of human behavior? What's exciting about today's geopolitical environment, to answer your question, is that that relationship has almost turned on its head. That politics can't keep up with the complexity of machines. And that invariably begs the question, how are you building your own national strategies around data sovereignty? How are you building your alliance structures with other countries where there can be feedback loops between infrastructure, data centers, access to data, so on and so forth? And what does the future look like when it comes to different countries, different governments wanting to not just secure, but also export machines, right? So that's at a sort of high level. I think coming to your question specifically about where the US, China, of course the UAE, Korea and others stand, is they're all taking a different track down that approach to being able to deal with the complexity of machines, right? So the US is trying very hard to control exports. Europe is trying very hard to control regulation. China is looking to focus on global standards around innovation. The UAE is looking to build and invest, so on and so forth. And at the moment, it can be termed only as the equivalent of a technology race between all these countries. At the same time, there is an internal focus. So the Korean president, I think, just launched a few weeks ago, announced that there's going to be $1 billion investment in building a sovereign data project. That is, of course, one of the biggest advantages of today building in the UAE and in the GCC. The US has got a firm hand on chips, but not on the entire supply chain, so is looking to identify ways in which they can shore up some of those alliances abroad, but also domestically need the production of AI platforms and AI tools to actually start making an impact domestically in their economy beyond just building out companies with steep valuations. So I think the priorities of all these countries domestically are going to differ. But internationally, there is very much a clear red thread that they need one another, and they need to be able to get a handle on the complexity of machines, which is a completely new phenomena when it comes to the relationship between geopolitics and technology.
And as a follow-up, for the UAE, it has massive compute investments, the G42, Core 42, in terms of building the data centers. And how do you see regional founders can leverage on those national sovereign AI initiatives? And Saudi also have the Humane project, for example.
So I'm not going to go into how exciting all of those things are. You know, you all are at the heart of one of the institutions that arguably is part of that story. I think accessing these things is both a gift and a curse, right? So G42 has got access to GPUs and compute power that can rub shoulders with most entities around the world. There is access to work with not just sovereign data, but to be able to get the sandbox regulation to be able to use it and produce. You know, one example is one of the most sophisticated use cases of AI for me is autonomous vehicles, right? And if you're an autonomous vehicle company founder in Europe today, good luck. Right, you're going to get stuck in reams of bureaucracy, reams of regulation, and it's incredibly difficult to get out and test. Whereas here, to be able to get sandbox licensing in order to start testing is far, far more straightforward, infinitely more. So there's definitely a lot of benefits that the UAE ecosystem affords. Now, the difficulty lies in, well, where do I go? Who do I partner with? Can I just go and knock on the door of these entities? The answer is no, right? I think you're certainly at the right place where there's a pull for folks such as ourselves at Shorooq, folks at Palmside G42 and elsewhere to come and talk to you and get to know you. But it's also incumbent on you to engage with the ecosystem as well. I think we're very much at the early stages of it. But it's slowly starting to get there. What do we need more of? A lot more mentorship. You know, when I go to the US ecosystem, I don't think that there is a qualitative difference between the talent that is building companies there or the talent that's building companies here. But what they do have access to is a much deeper, much more established ecosystem for mentorship, a lot more different avenues to be able to find team members and talent, and a lot more avenues to be able to apply for things like grants, etc., in order to get access to some of the architecture you need in order to build your companies. There's less of them in number here, but greater access. So you know, I think where we're sitting right now is a wonderful example of that. We've just launched this AI fund. Hopefully through that we can engage more with the likes of MBZUAI and others in order to facilitate that for you. And ecosystem engagement. So there'll be a lot that's going to happen over the next sort of year or two. And my advice would be just, you know, keep an eye out for it, engage, because there is a big demand domestically to find entrepreneurs and researchers that are building the companies of the future.
Yeah, and I'm curious about the point you mentioned on mentorship. Say if the founders in their very special domains cannot find mentors regionally, should they look outwards? What are the best channels for them to connect to high quality mentors overseas? Is attending event exhibitions the best channel, or linking messages? If founders say bring that questions up to you, what's your usually recommendation?
Yeah. So look, going back to the theme of the session, you know, earlier on I mentioned that there is an interdependency, almost like an interoperability between different governments and markets today when it comes to AI development, whether that's on talent, whether that's very real on infrastructure, or that's in terms of data. Now that necessitates that researchers, founders from different markets need to go beyond borders. We take some of our founders to different hubs around the world on an annual basis, whether that's London, New York, Shanghai, Hong Kong, Singapore, to meet with other investors, other AI companies, other researchers, other labs that they can collaborate with, in terms of how to reach out in a sort of practical way. Look, LinkedIn is of course one, but like I mentioned, there's less nodes, but far deeper access in the UAE today. You can turn up to an event hosted by Palmside or Shorooq or G42 or Mubadala and meet people and speak to them about what you're building, right? That access simply isn't as seamless and smooth. And that's the benefit of not being in a deep market, right? And then you can use that and leverage that to propel yourself into those networks. Not least because some of the institutions that I just named are investors or LPs in the leading AI companies or funds around the world. So, you know, engender those network effects and take advantage of that being here.
That's great. And oops, it ran out of battery. Hello. And my next question is on capital flows and industrial policy. So, how are the global capital flows and industrial policy influencing the AI innovations? And how can founders align their funding and fundraising and go-to-market strategy with those geopolitical currents?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And it goes back exactly to the theme at the heart of where AI and geopolitics intersect today. Most of what we're seeing when it comes to the key inputs in let's call it the AI ecosystem, whether that's around chips, data centers, data access, talent, and general infrastructure, overall infrastructure of the likes of research labs, universities, tech ecosystems, etc., are firmly today all part of an industrial plan, whether that's the US, China, Korea, the UAE, Brazil. This is top down today. So if you think about the commitments that the UK government, under a left-leaning Labour government, have made to building a domestic AI native industry, or you think about the example I gave you earlier about Korea, there is a big push. Now, in very real terms, what that means is you'll have access, especially if you're a citizen of those countries, but oftentimes these things are open to everyone, to grants, to go and build in these countries, to collaborate with them, to get access to their pools and pots of data, to be able to get sandbox regulation in order to work, so on and so forth. I think the real opportunity, however, lies in where do the highest number of those elements intersect. And what's exciting about the UAE is that I think most of them are here. Right? So let's take visas, for example, right? One may think that that's just a procedural matter, but when you think about some of the most significant revolutions in technology over the last 100 years, countries in which they've happened have actively sought out some of the best talent around the world and relaxed their visa regimes in order to get that talent in. The inverse of that is happening in many countries today. Right? Whereas the UAE at the same time has launched, golden visas. Saudi Arabia, I think it's called it's the green visa for entrepreneurs for extended residency, etc. These are kind of, if in business terms, think of this as the top of the funnel. If you're not able today to attract the best talent and facilitate for them a pathway to come, live, prosper, build in your country, then the conversation around the depth of what they're building does not even get started, right? This is why there's the famous stat that always goes around that, sort of 3 in 5 Fortune 100 CEOs are immigrants in the US. Sovereign data, like I mentioned before, you can come here today. In fact, I was just having lunch the other day with a founder, ex-Microsoft, could be building wherever he wants, and is building an AI company in, let's broadly call it, the national security space. And he said, there's no chance I could have built this in Europe or the US. I wouldn't have had access to the data. I would have got stuck with regulation. I would have got stuck with bureaucracy. I wouldn't have had a sponsor, so on and so forth. So sovereign data and access to sovereign data today, especially with domain-specific AI, is incredibly important, right? Now, chips, compute power, etc., that's where the conversation starts to get a lot more interesting, right? G42 and others here are ramping up significantly. The US remains the number one market for this. And so when you think about all those dials, think about which national strategy, which industrial strategy is best fit for you in terms of what you want to build. And look, make no mistake, the US is still, alongside China, two of the most exciting markets when it comes to AI. But in geopolitical speak, we're not in a bipolar world when it comes to AI, right? This is very much a multipolar moment where even just take the likes of Korea. Korea produces, on a per capita basis, the most number of AI patents in Asia after China, but receives, I think, the sixth most amount of AI funding in Asia for AI companies. So these kinds of opportunities and gaps that we can capitalize on as a market are really actually quite exciting. That means something is happening and there's more to do to support it. And for me, that makes the story of growth markets a lot more exciting. And there is an industrial policy to keep a lot of that talent in country.
That's great. And for Shorooq and Precise, 100 million fund, that's definitely a big capital inflow to capital flow to the region and maybe outflow. Is there any investment mandate for this specific fund or investment thesis that your team is going after?
Yeah. So primarily, first and foremost, we're going to be focused on growth markets, partly for the reason that I just mentioned, that we think that the opportunity when you factor in talent, infrastructure, data, and the opportunity delta for investing in AI in some of these markets, to us is most exciting in growth markets. So today emerging markets produce 2/3 of the world's GDP, have half the world's internet users, but less than 15% of venture funding goes to these markets, right? That's only going to change if people like me and others really make a bet on growth markets. So that's number one. Secondarily, we will of course look at Asia, Europe, and other developed markets. A, to learn, but B, to be a part of that journey and story as well. And that's a badge of honor, right? When software first burst onto the scene, or when social media platforms first burst onto the scene, VCs out of growth markets were not investing in those platforms that were coming out of Silicon Valley and New York and what have you. Today we can do that. Today we can get into those deals, and that is it propels our ecosystem, and will invariably at some point help all our portfolio companies. So that's on a geographic basis. From a functional basis, look, because of our primary focus on growth markets, we're going to focus on platforms and application layer AI, especially where there is really steep domain specificity. Founders are building an ontology before they go and start working with LLMs, and they are true experts in their industry and sector. That type of stuff is quite boring to a lot of people, but we find that those use cases around real change and productivity in specific industries is what's going to move the needle the most, especially for labor markets, and that's where we want to make a bet.
That definitely makes sense. And as you mentioned, now there's a global AI race, and the regulation and the market definitely makes the tech seem kind of fragment. And how do you see UAE as the neutral bridge? And how should founders in the UAE market leverage on this neutrality in terms of the political stand?
Yeah. So I have a slightly controversial view on this, because I think when people say the UAE should be neutral and sort of like the Switzerland of AI, it connotes that, neutrality, not taking a position, there's a passivity to that, which I don't like. Switzerland is also famous for chocolates and cheese and Swiss watches, which they've exported around the world and become world class at. That's the Switzerland that the UAE should aspire to when it comes to AI, which is to say, let's produce stuff and let's export it, right? The neutrality can be side by side with that in terms of working with both our peers and friends to the east and to the west. But you can either be a stopping off point and a neutral bridge, or you can be a hub that invites both sides. One is a bit more passive, the other is a bit more active. And so I like the framing of the UAE as a hub in the future for AI, where we can build stuff here as well for the world. Doesn't have to stay here, but starting here, if the origin stories are from here, I think that will realize a lot of the UAE's ambitions.
I like that. Sometimes people use the metaphor UAE as a corridor connecting the East and the West, but then people just kind of go through the corridor
Yeah,
like nothing.
you don't stop off. But I want people to stop here, hang out, and then they can go somewhere else.
That's awesome. And my next question is kind of on compute. It touched upon it a little bit for the earlier questions. So the access to GPUs and computes have definitely been a geopolitical issue and center of attention for many. And how are those export restriction and chip nationalism affect AI innovation? And for startups to invest, do you consider which country they're coming from, whether they can have access to those chips? What's your take on it?
Yeah, no, look, AI nationalism is an outgrowth of nationalism across the board, right? It didn't come first. We're seeing nationalist fervor around the world across countries of all different kinds of regime types. Now, if you are nationalistic about a sector or an industry or a technology to be protectionist, then I think that is disadvantageous for the global economy and generally the international community. If you are nationalistic about all these industries and sectors in order to beef up and build your domestic industrial base, in order to then export and collaborate with the international community, that's something that I think most of us can get on board with. So I think when thinking about who we invest in as companies and founders, we have no problem investing in AI founders who are building something in their home country for their home country. That is totally okay. And so long as it's a big market, you're doing something innovative, you can scale it, you can execute, have at it. But we would want to have a conversation with you about where next. Right? Where do you go from here? How can we add value from our ecosystem? How can you add value to our ecosystem? It should not be a one-way street. And those are the subtleties in terms of openness or not. Right? Similarly, if a company was building here and said to me, hey, we're only going to build for the UAE, I would say, look, I think you're being a bit myopic. Take advantage of all the support, the infrastructure, the talent, and the access you have here. Build here. Test here, but look to do something for the world, right? There's a narrative going around today globally that, you know, Silicon Valley should not be deciding everything that happens with such an important technology like AI. And I agree, but that's only going to not happen if other capitals step up and say, we're also going to allow companies to build here and then build for the world. I assure you, no founder is today building in Silicon Valley saying, this is I see this as an American company, right? From day one, they think about the world, right? Just like founders in large markets like India and China, from day one, think about 1 billion customers, right? Or hundreds of millions of customers at the very least, right? So the goal needs to be that founders building here in AI and otherwise, from day one, think I can build here and I can absolutely build here for other markets.
Yeah, and technically AI is making it easier. When you're calling an API of a certain model, it doesn't need the geographical boundaries in a way. And I would like to hear from you about some of the advice of our technical founders in the audience. How is your experience transition from academic founder to the industry? I know that's something a lot of our students are curious about, given their lack of, say, industrial exposure. How would you suggest them to align their research interests and find a commercial potential of their research and then kind of form a conviction to go for it and build their startups?
Yeah. Don't be a prisoner to your CV or your LinkedIn, right? My LinkedIn or my CV prior to me being a founder would never have indicated that I had an interest in entrepreneurship or I had any chops for entrepreneurship. But my CV and LinkedIn also doesn't tell the story that my father was an entrepreneur And I spent most of my life as a kid going with him to his shop as he sold things or as he interacted with customers. It also doesn't tell you the story that I grew up in London, which is a very fast-paced entrepreneurial city. It doesn't tell you the kinds of businesses or things that I was interested in as an individual, etc. So, you are more than what you study, and you are more than where your internship was or where your job was. Having said that, there are reasons why you have people that go and study business or go and work at large corporates or banks, because they develop certain frameworks and ideas that are really useful for businesses. So my advice would be, take risks, but also partner up with people that can furnish or complement your skill set. I just got pitched by a founder at let's call it a sort of tier 1, top 3 leading research lab in the US, right? Coming out of his PhD, the other 2 co-founders are PhDs from the same lab, and they are building an incredible business, exactly the kind of playbook that I described to you earlier. Sector specialists have built the most exciting ontology around their product, now looking to add large language layers to it and really take it to market, etc. But they, on very light pushing, could not give me a sophisticated answer on their go-to-market strategy or on their commercialization strategy. It was almost as though it had been, typed in ironically on ChatGPT and they came up with the answer, right? So that's unfortunate, because they are true experts. But you need to have a balance of both. And if you don't have it yourself, that's okay. That's why we have a policy that we try as best as we can to look for companies where there's more than one founder.
I see. And you have deep expertise in both technology and policy. What is the one thing that you think AI founders commonly miss in terms of policy that you feel like they should pay more attention to?
It's a great question. Look, public policy is such a large area. It governs, so much of society and our economic orders and what we do. I want to alter the question a little bit. I think tech founders absolutely need to be aware of the policy architecture in which they're building stuff. What I find that tech founders don't take seriously enough is not necessarily specific public policy in the country that they live and build, but it's the broader ramifications of geopolitics around them, right? For all the reasons that we've discussed today, we're firmly in an era where the price of how much you pay on an hourly basis for GPUs, or the type of data you can access, or how much you pay for talent, can shift markedly based on geopolitics. I mean, just think about the news a few weeks ago about the US. I don't know if it went through, now charging or looking to charge $100,000 for H-1Bs. All right, that is not just an internal policy. That has ramifications geopolitically for how the supply of top talent from India, Korea, Greece, the UAE, you name it, is thinking about, hang on a second, do I really want to go there and work? Right? These ramifications are going to be instant and increasingly instant, and they're going to ramp up. They will pertain to talent, to infrastructure, to fundraising, right? Even in my industry, VCs around the world will be given increasingly mandates that they should invest primarily, first and foremost, in their own home markets. right? Now, you can all take advantage of these things depending on where you build, right? One of the biggest gifts of where we're at today is that capital and capability is here in abundance. There are many things that still need to be worked out and worked on and brought in, and that's a journey. But you can access capital and you can access capabilities, and that'll give you a start.
That's great. Ooh. And I will just quickly summarize what we have covered so far and open up the floor to the audience for your questions. So we kind of started with Dr. Bilal's unique journeys and founding his own startups and becoming VC. And personally, I definitely had a lot of takeaways in terms of the geopolitical dimensions of AI developments and the capital flow. And we touch upon some practical strategies that technical founders can take away to when they navigate the tech scenes. And thank you so much, Dr. Bilal, for your sharing. And from your end, yes, please.
What is the perspective of VCs around the globe, on the region? How do they make the decision to come here and look at the companies and startups? Is it because as per my knowledge, and maybe it's
Dated.
perceived from one way or another, that people can think of the region as a cash cow. There's a lot of money, just send people, get the money, go back. But maybe I'm wrong, because I just want to hear from, because you know, and you're probably more connected in the VC's circuit, what is the perception globally, maybe not just the UAE, but generally?
Yeah, look, it's an excellent question. Yahya, right? It's a very good question. The headline is that perception persists, but it is rapidly changing, right? So that's the headline. Now, what's the detailed answer? The detailed answer is that, you asked me earlier, what do founders miss? One of the main pieces of advice I give to founders is you fundamentally need to understand how capital works. Who are you raising from? Where do they get money from? Where do they get money from? Why? Because what are the expectations along each of those nodes up until the point at which that capital reaches you? If you're raising from VCs, they need to 10, 20, 30, 40x their investment in you. What's their time horizon for it? How much are they putting in? If you're raising from corporate VCs, what is their approach going to be to governance? Because they have to both wear a hat where they may want to work for you as a corporate partner, but they're also an investor and have fiduciary duty. If you're raising from a government grant, is it no strings attached? Right? So on and so forth. So why do I start with that? I start with that because oftentimes capital that is, people that sort of look at the region do look at it as a cash cow. And so when you're raising from entities like that, you have to ask, do you have an allocation for this market? If you have an allocation for this market and you're going to invest in me, are you going to be involved? Are you going to add value? And I think those kinds of questions have not just been happening at the founder level increasingly, they also happen at my level, right? So when I talk to my investors and my LPs, I ask similar questions, right? Are you going to be investing in the region? What's your expectation of me? Where do you expect me to invest? Oftentimes they want me to invest in the ecosystem, which is great because I'm an ecosystem investor, right? Now, previously, it was purely to come here and leave with bags of money. Now, often I speak to fund managers who have been coming here for 4, 5, 6 years and have not been able to raise. It is becoming increasingly difficult. The UAE is not a wallet. and they refuse to be treated as one. And there needs to be value added on both sides. And that's a net positive. Going back to my point earlier about, nationalism. If your approach to nationalism is to build a domestic base or foundation for industry, capital, founders, entrepreneurship, etc., in order to then flourish globally, great. But if it's a one-way street, that's not going to work. And that works both ways, right? So I do think it's changing. I don't think it's changing. I don't think it's changed. It's changing. It's changing rapidly. We need more funds like our own who are focused on the region. We need more friends and colleagues abroad who are going to not just raise money from here, but invest here. So just in the last 2 years, some of our friends at General Catalyst invested 2 checks in the region. Incidentally, both were in my portfolio. QED, one of the leading fintech investors in the US, invested in the region. General Atlantic invested in the region. Augmentum Capital invested in the region, so on and so forth. So we're beginning to see a two-way street. Now, just to finish about your question, how do they perceive founders specifically? I think they're really impressed. Look, Dubai and Abu Dhabi and the UAE are probably some of the most cosmopolitan spaces in the world today. So it stands to reason that where there's this level of cosmopolitanism and diversity, that you will get top talent that is coming from all over the world, and that matches up to other big spaces like a Silicon Valley or London or a New York or a Paris or a Hong Kong or a Shanghai, where talent is coming from all over the world as well. Right? So I don't think people come here and say, oh no, that founder's not strong enough. I think that needs to be dispelled immediately. Like, that is just not true. I've spent time in both ecosystems. I deal with VCs from abroad all the time. I spend a lot of time with our founders. There is no difference in terms of skill, talent, background, vision, ideas between founders here and founders in Silicon Valley. What it comes down to is the ecosystem. Does it catch you or does it not? And if you have more institutions, more people, more muscle memory about failures and successes, it will catch you. If you don't, a lot of people will fall through. But that has to change over time.
Yes.
So I know Shorooq has a strong thesis related to technology. But then I'm curious, within that space, are there specific areas which you would say are low priority considered for Shorooq? Because I know that some VCs may look at educational technology and pull it down, may not really focus on that type of area. Is it the same? Is it consistent with Shorooq as well?
Yeah. What's your name? Brandon. So nice to meet you, Brandon. You're how old? Mashallah. So I really like your question. I would flip it. I don't think we see the world in terms of low or high priorities. I think we see it more in terms of what thesis we think we can add value to. So if you were building an incredible edtech company, right, and came to me and said, look, Bilal, I've built, I don't know if you guys use Blackboard here or are familiar with Blackboard. If you said, look, I've built the next generation of Blackboard. Blackboard sucks. It's ripe for disruption. I've got the next thing. It's super scalable, sticky. I've already got some pilots for it, so on and so forth. Here's my team, big market, etc. It'd be amazing. I just don't see that many theses around education and edtech. And therefore, for me to get excited about that is therefore really hard. What do I see more of? Where is my in-house expertise? And what excites us in terms of the size of puzzles in the market is around finance, access to finance, healthcare, mobility, robotics, so on and so forth. So it's not that education is not big enough. Education is humongous, right? What's another area that I can tell you? You know, construction, huge. I just don't have an in-house thesis, because the in-house thesis develops based on meeting more and more companies and founders that are building it, because it's a feedback loop, right? We're developing our hypotheses or our theses based on what we see in the market, and only then can we add value. Does that answer your question?
So basically, it's independent on what's being presented.
The thesis?
Yes.
The thesis, our approach to what you would call low priority sectors is independent of what's being presented. Yeah. If tomorrow I saw something incredible, we would look at it on the merits of its size of its market, the quality of the founding team, and the depth of the innovation. If those three things match up, no matter what it's in, we would invest.
Just something in this. You said there's lots of capital going in, but you're not really seeing the benefits just yet. Is there any immediate risk of an AI bubble?
I think we're absolutely in an AI bubble. I think anyone who thinks or says otherwise is not looking around. I think Jeff Bezos said the other day that there are different types of bubbles. There are bubbles that are disadvantageous to the economy and society because they fundamentally burst as a result of, quite frankly, market manipulation or some other form of engineering. Not big E engineering. I don't want to offend any of the students there. And then there are others that ramp up innovation at it's almost like bursting the dam, and then you claw back. Kind of like the tech bubble of the late 90s, early 2000s. Of course, that had an impact and a negative impact on financial markets and those investors who invested at crazy valuations. But from an innovation standpoint, it was a net positive for those sets of technologies, namely B2B software and others. And I think the same will happen with AI. The other thing is, look, this is truly global, right? I was talking to a friend the other day, and there's a lot of chatter that the AI moment is like the internet moment. But actually, it's like the computer moment, right? In that it is a fundamental shift, and it's here to stay. So, there will invariably be sort of retrograde motions of sort of, market corrections and innovation corrections. But in terms of where we're at with a revolution in technology, I think that's here to stay.
Okay, last questions.
We can take it from this
Okay.
young lady here. Yeah.
Share some your knowledge about the market of VC. Like you are always trying to find good project, and it's like good project is not that much, not that many, and also good money is not that much. Yes. So would you like to share some data in this globally speaking, is the UAE market with more good project proportion to the money, or with less good project proportion?
Okay, so if I understand your question correctly, it is the quality of the projects in the UAE. Are they commensurate to the capital they're receiving, or are they being almost overcapitalized, which could be problematic for the market? It's an excellent question. Very sophisticated question. So let me reflect on that a little bit. Both here and in the US, let's just go with that example because that's the most mature and well-known market for startups and technology. There are always cases where the capital that's been invested into those companies is just absolutely not commensurate with the depth of the technology or the progress of those businesses, right? There are startups in the US, these are real examples, that are doing 3 million in ARR and raising at $700 million valuations, right? So just to get you up to speed, the average is you do a 10x multiple on your trailing 12-month revenues. That's a good price, right? So imagine what the multiple is at 700 millions. I'm sure you can do the math. That kind of a trend is really problematic, and I think goes to your point around a bubble and where innovation and financial markets meet in a way that can be quite nefarious for, in my opinion, society. When you're an investor in a growth market or in a developed market surrounded by growth markets like in the UAE, you have to be really disciplined on valuation. So I would say it's far less common here for companies to get really well capitalized while the product or the performance is quite poor. Part of that is to do with how you started your question about the availability of venture capital funds. There just aren't that many. So even if I was on this gung-ho rampage where I was like, you know, Mr. Stereotypical VC and just doling out checks without doing due diligence and saying, yes, all right, you'll figure it out. Here's a term sheet at $100 million, even though you've done, you know, got like a bag of pistachios as revenue or something. The other places where you're getting investment from might be international VCs or family offices or sovereign wealth funds. And they will want to look at you independently with a very different set of glasses on. And may say, hang on a second, how the hell did you do this? So the bandwagoning effect is very different here. So as a feedback loop, it actually puts even more pressure on me, because if my company is going to raise, I could give you a term sheet for a $10 million round, let's say, and I said, look, I'll take 5 million of that, go and raise the other 5. I would be setting you up for failure if I gave you ridiculous terms, knowing that others in the market may not see you as liberally as I may. So I have to be sober, right? So that's a kind of behavioral checks and balance in our market. I need the tide to raise all ships. That may change one day. I hope it doesn't, because I think discipline over valuations is important for founders, it's important for VCs, and it's important for the market, especially for ones that are growing and nascent, like this one. Does that answer your question?
Great, that's a brilliant answer for a brilliant question to wrap up today's section. Can you guys join me for a round of applause to thank
Thank you so much,
Dr. Bilal
everyone.
for his
Appreciate it.
time?